Caroline, can you mute? I'm just gonna mute you. No. Okay, so, and this is the January 15th for the UCSD Trilogy Data Science Visualization course. Tonight we're going to be going over a bit of Flask, a bit of Beautiful Soup, a bit of HTML, and a bit of Splinter. So I suppose we should just go ahead and start with this nice Flask application that I have made. This Flask application that I have made is designed to basically fetch data from a website called Scryfall, specifically designed to use their API. So I didn't bother to implement parsing for this, but I use their API to extract a whole bunch of data on Magic the Gathering cards, as well as images. And I can go through the individual pieces of this, but it's really not that important for understanding Flask. The only real route here is this particular variable route. But maybe before I even get into that, it's worth discussing what Flask is. And Flask is a server application which lets you handle HTTP requests. That's all it does. If somebody sends an HTTP request to your Flask server, Flask will handle it in ways that are pretty straightforward. So if they send an HTTP request which routes to some string after a slash, it will call this function and return to the user whatever is returned by this function. Same if it receives a request which just ends in a slash, it will return this. That's all Flask is. It accepts HTTP requests and returns them to the user. Are there any questions conceptually about the role Flask plays in building websites? Okay then. So this little application that I made reads data from the Scryfall API and does a bunch of processing of it, and eventually passes off this data to a render template function, which you guys have seen, but we're going to be going over again. The render template function is a Flask utility that lets you create a template HTML that can be populated from the server side whenever a user makes a request. So instead of having to have a bunch of static HTML files, you can have a single function that generates a whole wide range of HTML files, depending upon what the user wants. It's also worth noting that you should all have these files, or at least have access to them. I uploaded them to Slack earlier tonight. So this render template function accepts an argument, which is the file name for the template HTML that it's going to populate and return. It also accepts any number of optional arguments, which tell Flask how to populate the template HTML. So inside of my template HTML file, there are a variety of variables. So for example, here, I've defined a loop, which is going to tell Flask to repeat this element for each set code in set codes, where set codes is defined here. And it's specifically a sorted list. The syntax for this is a little weird. Basically, you have these curly braces and a % symbol, to denote to Flask that you're trying to do a loop. And then inside of that loop, you can use the double curly braces to reference your iterative variable. Much like if you were to do for item in my list, you can have access to item inside of that loop. You then have to close the for statement. And what this is going to do is populate a drop-down menu. And you can see that functionality when I go to my website right here. I have this drop-down menu that gets automatically populated with a few hundred values. Does anyone have any questions about how this particular portion of the HTML works, or this particular portion of Flask is functioning? No? Okay. Moving on then. The next thing that I'm going to do is have very similar logic, except now I'm looping over a bunch of image URLs, and I'm adding a bunch of image tags to my HTML file. And you can, so here I'm looping over my images, which is defined here. I pass images as images. I loop over them, and for each image URL, I set the source URL, and that's it. And the HTML file that gets generated will have a bunch of tags that look like this for each image URL in images. And what does that look like? It looks like these images. And there's a bunch of them. So you should already start to see the power of Flask here. Because of the nature of my data and how varied it is, I'm able to define a single tag and have it work for hundreds of images. It just saves me, if I had to manually write out all these image URLs, all these image tags, it would just be miserable. I don't have to do that because I'm using Flask. The final thing that I'm doing is actually passing an HTML table. And I generate that HTML table. We'll talk about that in a bit. But I pass that HTML table, and I just access it as card details because that's what I named it. And I denote that this content is safe, which tells Flask to treat it as HTML code. If you do not say that it is safe, then Flask will treat it as a string, and you won't get a correctly formatted table. And that table can be seen all the way down at the bottom of the page. It might be worth just quickly going over how I created that HTML. Basically, I created a pandas data frame, and then I used a pandas data frame method called toHTML to generate an HTML formatted string, which could then be inserted into my index.html file. As usual, it's easier to use data frames than it is to try to implement the logic yourself. This is not the only way you could do it. This is an easy way to do it given the data isn't static. If the data is static, there are a variety of tools that let you convert tabular data to HTML data. And you can Google them, CSV to HTML. We gave you guys a link to one such source in the Homework 11 README. And that's just a, yeah. So yeah, that's this little application. The final thing that I do is run it.
Hey, Nolan.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you, what is that? Card data is equal to K high, can you just explain that line? What does that line do? Card dot get. And actually, what is this entire codes, right? There's that snippet of code, this three-line code. Basically, it obtains the table from some website and then puts it in our website, or what does it do?
Uh, kind of, yeah. So the actual data that I get, which actually gets fetched here, is a JSON format.
Okay.
And what this is doing is pulling out a bunch of data from each entry in the JSON list, basically.
Okay, and one of them is a table itself, right?
No, the JSON results do not have a table. Let me. I don't have access to the URL, but I can get one. Look, whatever. So the Scryfall returns data in JSON format. It's a JSON API.
Okay.
And all I'm doing in that stretch of code that you were talking about is selecting specific data from that big JSON table because a lot of
Okay.
it isn't. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And then what is that for key in keys? What does that keys variable do? Is it
Uh,
the keys of the API?
I define a list of keys here, and
Okay.
this is how I choose what data to get. I
Okay.
want
From
the
that
name of
API.
each
Okay.
card, I want the mana cost of each card, I want the type, I want the Oracle text, so on and so forth.
I see.
This is just me selecting data and making a data frame. The only particularly new thing here is this to HTML. And I don't think you guys have seen that before, but all it does is convert a data frame to a formatted HTML string.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this application? No? Okay. In that case, we can move on and I can show you guys how to read an HTML table. One of the reasons I made this is just to have a convenient table to read. So now that I have this website going, I can take you guys over to this Jupyter Notebook file where I'm going to be trying to read this HTML table. And it's pretty straightforward how that works. So I'm doing some imports here I plan to be using pandas, the request module, and Beautiful Soup. The first thing that I'm going to do is do a request and get the content I'm after, get the page that I'm trying to. I want to get to the page that has the table that I'm trying to read. And I do that by going to this URL. Note that in this case, because I'm running this website locally, this URL points me to localhost. And you can quickly see what that HTML looks like. It's pretty straightforward, but hard to read because it's HTML. So I'm not going to manually parse it with just my eyes. Instead, I'm going to use Beautiful Soup. I'm going to pass Beautiful Soup the text of this HTML document. And I'm going to be using an HTML parser. The next thing that I do is use Soup to parse this and pull out table elements, specifically tables of type data frame. And just as a quick check, I recommend you guys do this whenever you're using Beautiful Soup and Find All. You should verify that you have the actual item that you're looking for and that there aren't duplicates. Potentially, just make sure that it's the right one. So here I verify that there is only one table on the page. And here I select that specific table and just quickly look at it. Once again, it's HTML, so it's hard to parse. Fortunately, pandas can read HTML. And it has this convenient read HTML function. And one of the things that you can do is pass it an HTML formatted string. So my table 0 gets me to here, which is this complicated HTML. I convert that to a string. And because pandas.readHTML is designed to assume there may be multiple tables in your data set, it actually returns a list of data frames. So I'm going to get the very first table and then just quickly print it out. And if you look, you can see that this table is effectively equivalent to the table that I get when I go to localhost :5000 RNA, which is going to take a second. Angel of Grace, 3 white, white. Angel of Grace, 3 white, white. Perfect. We have successfully read an HTML table from a website. Does anyone have any questions here?
No, I'm good.
Oh,
Okay.
I have one. So
Sure.
even if you pass an HTML of one table, Pandas still assumes that you have multiple tables?
Yes, this read HTML function will always return a list.
Oh,
It will return a list of data frames.
okay. Because I definitely did not remember to include a subscript, but somehow I still return a data frame.
I don't know.
Interesting.
It's possible I'm mistaken. We can look at the documentation.
Maybe it's gotten smarter.
According to the documentation, it returns a list of data frame objects.
I see.
I don't know what you did or how you did it, but read HTML should always return a list.
Can you rerun it and let's see what happens? Just delete
Yeah.
it. Can you delete the subscript and run it and see what happens?
Sorry. Yeah. This is what you get, which is a list containing a data.
Okay. And
As opposed to this.
I see. Okay, I got it. Thank you.
Any other questions on this read HTML function? It has a lot of options that you can try to go into, and it has some notes that are worth reading if you run into problems. But for the most part, I'd recommend using Beautiful Soup to select individual tables, and then using pandas to read the string returned by Beautiful Soup. In theory, you can just give read HTML a URL, an address, but that doesn't work all that often.
Oh, does the read HTML function only take string?
It does not. You can also pass it a URL. It's just unlikely to work in my experience.
Oh, I think what we did in the class example was we passed an URL.
Yeah, and it's
that's why
it does
I
not
got
recognize all things that are in fact tables, and as a result, it's not very trustworthy. You should probably just use Beautiful.
Okay, so it's better to obtain the HTML, convert it into string, and use read HTML.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, well, looks like it worked on this one.
Yeah, you have to add HTTP the entire path.
Yeah. But you can, I've worked with these in the past and had them not identify tables before, which is a really frustrating bug to encounter, which is why I just kind of don't bother with it and just use Beautiful Soup. It also lets you select specific tables, which is nice. But I don't know. Any other final questions on reading HTML tables? Okay then. Let's finally move on. So this is just a slightly modified version of one of our class activities from week 12, day 2. This is the instructor splinter activity. And I just wanted to quickly go through this and talk about what Splinter is and how we're using Chrome Driver. So Splinter is a Python library which is designed to let you create what are effectively authentic browser requests. Instead of using the request module, when you're using Splinter and you're using Chrome Driver, you are actually using a version of Chrome to make your requests. The Chrome Driver itself is just the version of Chrome that you're using, and it's packaged in a way that's designed to work with Splinter. And as a result, when I go ahead and run this and get some, here we go. When I went ahead and when I ran this line of code, it opened a browser. It opened a specific browser that was being controlled, that's going to be controlled by Splinter and is implemented by the Chrome driver. That's literally this window. And whenever you do anything with Splinter and that browser, it's going to actually manipulate this application. So here I'm going to visit Quotes to Scrape. I'm going to visit that website and you will see this page update as I do it. Now, it flashed through a few pages there because in addition to just visiting that URL, I also have this click link by partial text. But you can do this for anything, like in theory, this works if I spell things correctly. So Chrome Driver is effectively a Chrome application. Splinter is a library that lets you control a Chrome Driver application. Why do we use that? So that is
Somebody's sound is kind of found no one.
okay. Sorry about this. I need to access some stuff.
Oh yeah, right.
All right, so back to this. So Splinter is a library that controls Chrome Driver. Chrome Driver is a version of Chrome designed to work with Splinter. Why would we want this? Why would we want to be able to mimic a full-fledged browser? There's actually a lot of reasons. The first is that you could be trying to test, maybe you want to test your website and you want to use a real browser to test it. Well, this is one way you could do that. The reason we introduced it to you guys in class is because there are many web pages which kind of require user input in order to get specific data back. For example, on this page, if you want to access these elements, they kind of don't really exist until you actually click on it. This is actually editing the page in place. Similarly, there's the very first web page we had you guys scrape in homework for week 12 required you to use Splinter, or you could have used Splinter to click on a view image button. And in doing so, that would let you more easily access the image URL, which was not otherwise available on that page until you clicked that button. And there's a lot of other things that you can do with this, but basically, anytime you require some type of user input in order to get to some data, you can use Splinter to mimic that user input in order to get to the data you want. Does that make sense? Right.
Splinter is still a little confusing to me, but I probably just have to research it more.
Do you understand what, at a high level, what Splinter is?
So it makes requests easier when you're trying to scrape.
It lets you control this browser. This is a full-fledged browser, and Splinter can control it.
So it allows you to control the browser.
Yeah.
Nolan, would Splinter allow you to bypass websites that has captchas, or like "I'm not a robot" checkboxes? Is that one of the use cases for using Splinter if you're doing web scraping?
Yeah, that's my question too.
Potentially, I have not looked into doing that, and I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's probably a pain in the ass, and it probably doesn't work very well. But I don't know. Someone's done it. Someone's tried it.
But conceptually, is that one of the use cases? Maybe is that what you mean by mimicking a browser?
More things like if you wanted to, you could log into a website using Splinter by automating the user input.
Okay.
You could also, things like that. If there's a specific part of the page that you need to click on that modifies the page, then you could click on it using Splinter. If you want to navigate within the page, you can do that with Splinter in a way that's maybe easier than trying to do it with HTML parsing.
Nolan, so do we have the Splinter kind of function also in the command prompt or something? Like, for example, whenever we click the Google Chrome icon in our desktop, right, the browser opens, right? How does the browser open? It just opens by executing that Chrome driver command, or how does it open? Does it have anything related to do with Splinter?
It doesn't. It has nothing to do with Splinter. Chrome driver is an entirely different version of Chrome. It's really not even technically a version of Chrome. You also have to have Chrome installed in order for Chrome driver to work. But for our purposes, you can think of it as a different version of Chrome that can be controlled by the Splinter library, which is a Python library.
I see, thanks.
Nolan, can you program Splinter to click on any button and any links on a website?
In principle, yes.
Okay, can you explain the click link by partial text function? I suppose there are a lot of similar functions to handle different type of like links or button. Like when do we know which one? How do we know which one to use?
So this browser click link by partial text is going to look through the look through the page and identify the first link, the first button containing the text next, and it's going to click that button. In this case, that button is right here.
I see. Would it still work if the website is more complicated?
You're saying
Because
like,
yeah, because I've tried on like real websites and it didn't seem to work.
I would have to look at the individual website. You could look at the
Francis, I've noticed that Splinter is case sensitive.
Is what?
It's case sensitive. So if you type that statement with a lowercase n, it wouldn't click the button.
I see. Yeah, I definitely checked the spelling and everything, but for some reason it didn't work on the website.
without seeing the website and your code, all I can really advise you to do is look at the documentation and try to figure out why what you're doing doesn't work.
Okay.
I
Can
can
I
drop.
send it to you later? I'll show you later tomorrow.
Sure, you can show me tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, because it seemed like a simple next text and then a next button, and there was nothing else like it on the page, but for some reason, it didn't turn the page.
I dropped a link to the Splinter documentation if you guys want to look into it.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, at this point, we are in Q&A. So if any of you have any questions related to these activities or other class content, feel free to ask.
Well, I have a question on Beautiful Soup.
Sure, what's up?
You know, when we scrape information from the text, sometimes we'll have different tags nested within the other. But let's say I want to extract the text from the outermost tag without like grabbing all the other tags within the, whatever other tags are inside. How should I do that?
Well, you can use the find all. You can also manually. I don't recommend this, but as usual, the best answer is going to come from looking through this Beautiful Soup documentation and querying online. You can, like, hang on, let me, this one. If you actually know the path to the thing you're trying to get to, you can basically access it and treat it like a tree. So let me quickly. Let's copy this. Paste that. So soup.body should get me to some other part of the HTML. Hooray, it did. I can go to soup.body. Let's see, what do I want to go to? Let's see what that gives me. So this gets you to the first div object. You could also find all div objects. You can treat this search as if you're working on a tree and just like work your way down to the specific element you're looking for. But ideally, you would try to like try to identify something that's unique and above the thing you're searching for in order to make it easy to traverse that tree. So, yeah.
Don't think that addressed the problem.
I'm sorry?
Oh, I don't think that addressed the problem because finding the tag wasn't the problem. It's when I have one tag nested within each other, and within each of those tags, there are like tags.
Yeah, you
But I
have
only want to extract.
a div inside of a div, right? And you want to
Yeah,
find
let's say I have a tag within a div, but then within both the tags there are like tags. But I only want tags from the div tag. So if I run extra tags, I'll get both. And so far, I have to use string manipulation to get rid of the unnecessary tags. But is there a way
you
to
can do here? Let me show you something. So this is going to find multiple items. And I can prove that by printing, let's capture it. So there are 2 items here, right?
Okay.
If I know that I want the first one, I can do div cont 0, and then this is a soup-like object, and you can do your iterative searches on that. You could also select the second one like this. In this case, I know that I want the second one, and then I want to get to the table. And that gets me back to where I was when I just did the search for the table. Here. Does that kind of make sense? Like when you do the find all, it will return a list of results, and you can index inside those just like a normal list and select the one that you want.
Yeah, this I understand. I think I'll show you my exact question tomorrow.
Sure. It's possible I'm missing aspects of the question for some reason.
Yeah, it's specifically a question specifically for extracting text. And kind of
Sure. So
when I was getting the weather. Yeah.
So
and
you want to select the specific attribute that you're. Oh, you're talking about like avoiding getting the text of lower elements, right?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. This question makes sense now.
Yeah. Sorry, for making sense because I wasn't quite sure how to call it.
There should be a way to do this using beautiful soup dot. Yarg, I'm getting lost. I need you gone. So if you do .text, that should convert basically the entire, everything that's beneath, everything contained inside of your current tag should get turned into text. And you don't want that.
No.
I'm pretty sure string is going to get you only the tag that you currently selected, and it will get you the text data for that tag. In this case, I've chosen a bad example because the table doesn't have any text associated with it. Let me see if I can find a better one. Let's look for TD. This isn't gonna work either. I need. I don't have a good example here to work with. I'm pretty sure string does what you want. I'm not 100%, but I'm pretty sure it does. You should be able to.
Like a string?
I'm sorry?
Then I can manipulate it like a string using subscript and stuff.
Yeah, this should return a string, but it should only return the string associated with the specific tag that you're at. It shouldn't give you the string. It shouldn't give you all of the text.
So it will return the first one.
No, it's going to return the string associated with your current tag. Does that make sense?
Okay,
If
even
you
though
had-
they're lower level tags.
Yeah, if you had like a paragraph tag, I'm writing HTML here, even though it's going to be formatted hideously.
Mhm.
But if you did this and you had some text, right?
Yeah.
Right. Let's imagine this is our situation, and you're trying to extract some text.
Yeah.
So you can use Beautiful Soup to get you to this element, this spot in the HTML, and then you can ask for the string of this, which should get you only this data.
Okay.
In theory.
Very handy tool. Thank you.
This is something that I haven't done in a while, so it's perfectly possible that I'm mistaken.
I'll look into it.
Apparently, you can also use the find and specifically select text and specifically select recursive to be false. So this is another way that you can do it.
The find function. Wait, soup.find all text equals to true. So how do you incorporate that? So we use find function to look for text, and then we have to add this part to it. How do we incorporate that?
So you can call find all on the results of. You can call find on the results of find, or
Okay.
narrow down to the specific region that you're interested in, and then you can disable the recursive search on the subsequent find in order to only get first level data.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I can show you in class tomorrow. This is something that would be easier to do on your computer. Does anyone have any other questions right now?
Yes, I do. For Flask,
Yeah.
can you use static HTML pages along with Flask, or is it either or? Either use Flask or only HTML?
You can render static HTML files. You have to put them inside of your static folder.
Okay.
Every application should have, among other things, a templates folder containing their template HTML files and a static folder containing their static resources, images, HTML files. And there's a different section that isn't render template.
Could you repeat the last part again?
There's a different function that isn't render template. Is that my mic that's going crazy?
I don't think it's yours.
All right, well. You can also put your HTML files in your render templates folder and just render them with no parameters. That works too, but that's kind of ugly and you shouldn't do that.
So when you have static HTML files, you would still use the Flask application and have a route app.route to go to the static file. Is that how you would drive it?
All right, so here's what you can do. You can set your static path and you can return from app send static file your index. Alternatively, what you can do if you have a static HTML file is return you can throw it in your template folder and return render template file name with no other parameters. And because you haven't given it any other parameters, it's not going to do any changes to the HTML file, and it should just render.
So what would be the URL that will get you to the file.html? For example, that app.route that we use / something that gives you some, yeah, so.
So like, instead of returning a redirect here, if I had another HTML file, I could just return under template. Here, I'll just do it.
Okay.
In theory, this works. I haven't tried this. Hooray, it worked. Just rendered my template.
Okay, thank you, Nolan.
This isn't really the preferred way to do it. You can Google online, like the resource that I showed you with Stack Overflow. This tells you how to do it better, because you really shouldn't have mix in static HTML files with your template HTML files, just because it will make your project harder to manage.
Okay.
But you can just do this. You can just render a template with no parameters, and it will return that HTML file with no modifications.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you, Nolan.
No problem. Any other questions? All right, so I suppose that will be all then. Done about 50 minutes. I need to eat.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Nolan, and thanks a lot to everyone who asked questions.
Yes, thank you all. Thank you, Nolan.
See you all tomorrow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.